This week we move on to the area of philosophy known as metaphysics. Now you can look at the prefix meta in different ways depending on your perspective. It actually means that which came after. If you begin by studying the nature of the physical world, then once you've exhausted the information, there are questions that remain that cannot be answered through the lens of naturalism. So when you begin to ask those questions, you have moved beyond or after physics, the study of nature, to ask the question as to whether there exists any non-material realities or aspects to reality. So while it means that which comes after physics, if you have a different perspective, it might be helpful to think about it coming before physics. For example, if all of the physical stuff on your view came from an ultimate source that was immaterial, non-physical, well, in this case, it might be more helpful for you to think of metaphysics as digging at those immaterial questions concerning the nature of where the world comes from, or the nature of the design that was given to it or intended for it. So obviously, this would be digging at theistic questions. Another way to think about it, we do this a lot in my moral philosophy class, is to picture a house that has two stories. So you have the downstairs and an upstairs. The downstairs represents the physical stuff. The upstairs represents the immaterial stuff. So this is kind of like Plato's cave, where the downstairs is inside the cave and the upstairs is beyond the cave. The driving questions of metaphysics really come down to, do both exist, the upstairs and the downstairs, or just one or the other? That's the first question. And the other is, granting that there may be an upstairs in this house in which we live, supposing we have a two-story house, does our house include a staircase? In other words, is there any way for us to even go from the downstairs to the upstairs, or from the upstairs to the downstairs? Can we gain knowledge relating to the upstairs locked in the downstairs as we seem to be? Or is there any way for things in the upstairs to relate directly to things in the downstairs? So as we know by now from our study in epistemology, in solving one problem, Descartes really raised another problem, and it is a core problem of the modern era. Now, while Kant may have provided a solution as it related to the question of epistemology and bridging the debate between rationalists and empiricists concerning how we know, the problem remains as to what there is. And the problem really comes down to the I. Some call it the soul, or the core or seat of identity. Who am I? What is it to be me? We experience things, but who are we? Recall that Descartes said the I is the most certain thing that there is. So we can be certain that it exists. And he based our justified belief in the physical world upon this certainty in the I. However, we have no real knowledge concerning what the I is, only a certainty that it exists. And moreover, while we can know that the physical world exists and we are certain that the I exists foundationally, these two things are nothing like one another. So what we have then is the idea of an existing I embodied within a physical world that functions in a very mechanistic way according to laws of cause and effect. Here we already have two questions, two sides of the same problem, really. If the self or the soul is embodied, so I have an immaterial self attached to my physical form, where exactly is this self located, and how exactly is there an interaction? Is it possible for the self to affect the body, or does it just watch everything that happens to the body? If it can affect the body, how is that? How can something immaterial move something material? Is it possible for something that happens to the body to affect the self? If so, How is that possible? One of these things is not like the other. So at this point, we have two fundamental options. Either we accept that both things exist, or we get rid of the I and just focus on the body. There is, of course, that third option of idealism, that all of the stuff in the physical realm, the body, just amounts to an idea that the core self has. But if you're unwilling to reduce all of the physical stuff to the mind, then either both things exist, or you have to reduce all talk of mind to brain, and the self or subjectivity as some sort of phenomena happening within your body or between your body and its environment. So if substance has to do with the question of an existing thing's essence, and dual has to do with two parts, substance dualism is the view that the world, our reality, is made of both physical and non-physical or immaterial stuff. And the mind cannot be reduced to the body. Mind and body are two different coexisting things. Materialism is the view that all that exists is the material or physical stuff. And so when it comes to this issue, reductive materialism means that since the world is made of only physical stuff, we are ultimately material, and the I, or consciousness, what we consider individuality and identity, this is just an effect of material causes. Consciousness emerges from material processes. And so we have before us two problems to consider and two perspectives from which to consider them. The mind-body problem refers to the philosophical investigation into how the human mind and human body are related to each other. Do both exist, and if so, how do they interact? Now, Descartes said the I was certain, but not the you. So it seems that I could never know for certain that you are a conscious being, like myself, rather than merely a robot. Nor could I ever confirm that your claims concerning your own experiences are true. We just made the distinction between substance dualism and reductive materialism. When speaking about the mind-body problem specifically, we tend to use the terms mind-body dualism and mind-body materialism. So the mind-body dualist holds that human beings are composed of both a conscious spirit mind and a non-conscious physical body, whereas the mind-body materialist believes that conscious minds are the product of physical brain activity and nothing more. Unavoidably tethered to the mind-body problem is the question of personal identity. We're talking about the I. Does the I stay the same? We can look at physical things and measure their durability or consider how they hold up or change over time. But we can't do this with the I. So what assurance do I have that I today am the same person I was 20 years ago? In many ways, we appeal to just the opposite, don't we? Well, I'm not the same person I was back then. I have grown a bit, and experience has seasoned my perspective. But what would this mean for personal identity? Let's consider the ship of Theseus, sometimes called the paradox of Theseus. It was initially introduced by the ancient Greek Plutarch. It was later expounded upon by others, including Thomas Hobbes and John Locke. Now, Theseus was a figure from Greek mythology who sailed around, accomplishing many great feats. He was even considered the founder of Athens, probably most famous for his battle with the Minotaur. Now, given his adventures, Theseus's ship has surely sustained damage over the years. Plutarch writes, "The ship wherein Theseus and the youth of Athens returned from Crete had 30 oars, and was preserved by the Athenians down even to the time of Demetrius Phalereus. For they took away the old planks as they decayed, putting in new and stronger timber in their places, insomuch that this ship became a standing example among the philosophers for the logical question of things that grow, one side holding that the ship remained the same, and the other contending that it was not the same. So the question is this: If we have a ship like Theseus's, and as the planks become old and need replacing, we replace them with stronger, newer planks until eventually every plank on the ship has been replaced. Is it the same ship? If Theseus has gone on all these adventures with his ship and now is gone and his ship is being preserved by the Athenians in this manner, then once every plank has been replaced, do they still have Theseus's ship? Is this that ship of the great adventures, or some new ship? As if this question were not tough enough, Thomas Hobbes, a philosopher of the Enlightenment, complicated things further, as philosophers love to do, right? Hobbes asks, suppose that every time we replace a plank on Theseus's ship, we set it aside until we have all of the planks from the original ship, and then suppose we use all of those original planks to build a new ship. So by the time you get to some point in the distant future, you will have the original ship with all of its planks replaced, call this ship A, and a new ship that has been built from all of the original planks from the original ship, called the new ship, ship B. Now we have two questions. In addition to the original question as to whether we can rightfully call ship A Theseus's ship once all of its planks have been replaced, now that we have another second ship that was built from the original planks, we have the question, is this ship B actually Theseus's ship? Is one of them Theseus's ship? Are they both Theseus's ship? Neither? What are we to conclude? Just as an aside, an FYI for fun, as some of my students know, I play prog metal, and I really wanted to start a band called Theseus's Ship because, well, the problem of identity is tied to the problem of progression through time. Well, artistic as that may or may not be, in wisdom, my bandmates reminded me that you want the sort of name that people will remember, and to remember it, they need to be able to pronounce it. And Theseus's Ship didn't really fit that category. So there you go. A little insight into my mind and glimpse into my personal life, if you wanted it. So the problem of identity is a problem, right? If we can't agree on whether or not it's the same ship, and we're talking about something that we can actually look at and measure, the physical stuff is supposed to be the easy stuff to deal with, right? If we can't agree here, how shall we approach other issues of identity? Like the identity of Batman. Who is Batman? Is it Bruce Wayne or one of the other people who have worn the Batman outfit? Is Batman Michael Keaton, Ben Affleck, Val Kilmer, George Clooney, Adam West, someone else? Suppose we just focus on the fictional character, Bruce Wayne. Is Batman only to refer to Bruce Wayne wearing the cape, or is Bruce Wayne Batman, cape or no cape? If we focus only upon comic lore and solely upon the person Bruce Wayne, rather than anyone else who has donned the cowl and cape, which Batman is the real Batman? The one who wears blue and gray, or black and gray? The one with the symbol of the bat in black surrounded by yellow? Or just the black bat? Add to this the problem of multiverses within the DC universe, and we find many different Batmen, including one gunslinger Batman, whereas other Batmen would never touch a gun. Similarly, with Robin, there were several. So what makes someone the one whom we identify them to be? And whenever things attached to that identity change, does the identity change? Can we say it is the same person? How can you measure your own past experiences? How can you be certain of your own identity? In many ways, we say that we're not the same person. In many ways, with time especially, we take on multiple roles and multiple identities, and sometimes we may be a parent, and sometimes a child, sometimes a teacher, sometimes a student. Our identities seem to change in some ways, and we consider ourselves evolving or progressing through time. So how do we know that we're really the same person? If our identity can change with time in one sense, does it change with time in other senses? Well, according to the idea of an indiscernibility of identicals, two identical things must share all the same properties. Well, in this case, if we need to look more closely at the properties of things, it will be important to distinguish essential from non-essential or accidental properties. Essential properties are those core elements necessary for a thing to be the thing that it is. Non-essential or accidental properties are traits that could be taken away from an object without making it a different thing. The fact that Bruce Wayne is a millionaire certainly helps Batman in affording all of his gadgetry. Yet supposing he could afford to keep his utility belt stocked, cannot we imagine Batman without all of the extra stuff afforded to millionaire Bruce Wayne? The equipment for sure is helpful, planes and Batmobiles, but Batman could still be Batman even without those things, could he not? For the sake of argument, let's say you disagree. Fair enough. Let's say that Batman needs to have those things which must be funded by money. It's not the case that it must be Bruce Wayne who has the money. So we can imagine a situation in which Batman is Batman in regards to all the things that we associate with Batman, and yet Bruce Wayne is not a millionaire, though he may have connection to a millionaire. Perhaps he is best friends with Oliver Queen. It would seem then that Bruce Wayne's being a millionaire is not an essential property of Bruce Wayne's being Batman. However, many people would expect to see Batman in cowl and cape. So some might argue that the outfit is essential in our being able to identify Batman from the plethora of other DC comic superheroes. Others may push back with counterpoint here, arguing that it's not the cowl and cape, but the past experiences that made him who he is. That's central to his identity. But supposing we go with cowl and cape, the outfit identifies the Batman. And suppose if we agree that the cowl and cape are what are central to the identity of the hero known as the Batman, then we might be okay with different persons donning the cowl and cape and still being called the Batman. We still have the question of which cowl and cape. There have been so many. Does it matter? Fungibility refers to the property of being interchangeable with other objects of the same kind. So if we identify Batman not according to individual persons' past experiences, but according to the icon that is recognized by cowl and cape, and to be clear, I'm not making that argument here, then we might be comfortable reading the story of any person, Bruce Wayne or otherwise, who dons a Batman-esque cowl and cape. Whether it is blue or black, whether the icon has a yellow background or not, these are fungible things that are non-essential to what it means to be the Batman. Of course, we may disagree over what is an essential or accidental property, or what counts as fungible. But supposing that we do agree that when it comes to superheroes anyway, the identity seems to be intertwined with iconography and outfit, this might solve the problem of identifying the sidekick Robin. For whether we are speaking of Dick Grayson or Jason Todd or Tim Drake or Stephanie Brown or Damian Wayne, anytime they donned the traditional outfit or something like it, we call them Robin. And we recognize that the older Dick Grayson begins to dress differently, and we identify him as Nightwing and no longer as Robin. Now, this has been a shallow treatment. We haven't really solved the problem of superhero identity, but here we run into a different sort of problem. For Dick Grayson, function for a time as Robin, and function for a different time as Nightwing. And Stephanie Brown functioned for a time as the fourth Robin, and for another time as the fourth Batgirl. So when one person is split between two identities, does that cause a problem? Grayson even became the Batman. We could go on, and comics offer much food for thought on these issues, but let's move on. It's one thing to ponder the identity of a superhero icon and tether identity to imagery insofar as we're speaking of heroic ideals. It's a much more difficult thing to speak of our identity as a subjective knower, as the I of which Descartes spoke, as existing across experiences throughout time. What is there about you that has remained even if everything else has changed with time? Body theory holds that your personal identity persists over time because you remain in the same body over time. Recalling Theseus' ship, however, do you really remain in the same body? Our cells die, and our body continues to replenish new cells, in the same way that Theseus' ship was replaced with new planks over time. Can we really say that we have the same body, even if we have the same form? In the same way that Theseus' ship keeps its form because all of the planks are not replaced at once, but rather one at a time. The others hold the ship together while the pieces are replaced, but eventually you have complete replacement. So too with our bodies. All of our cells are not replaced at once, but after a period of time, our cells have been replaced and replenished. Can we say that we have the same body? So will it be successful then to tether identity to the body? Memory theory, in contrast, holds that personal identity persists over time because you retain memories of yourself at different points, and each of those memories is connected to one before it. Or maybe it's the case that you are not the same person. What do you think? If you can't tell, I'm a bit of a comic fan. The Wolverine is a fascinating character study here. He suffers from a long-term memory loss that in many ways is related to a post-traumatic stress. Already possessing claws and a mutant healing factor, he was the subject of experimentation in which his bones were covered with an indestructible type of metal. He was meant to become a controlled animalistic superweapon called the Weapon X. Because of the experimentation, he recalls nothing about his life prior to this point, and he recalls little about his life during this time. Because the animalistic nature was brought out in him and he was made to be a superweapon, as he escaped, he killed many people. And even beyond this, he's really good at killing. In his own words, I'm the best there is at what I do, although what I do isn't very nice. Of course, this did not define him after the fact. He became a hero, an X-Man, and eventually a teacher. Our questions are these. Is he the same person he always been? Or is he different? Was Weapon X the same person as whoever he was prior to that point? Is the X-Man and teacher the same as the Rabbit Weapon X? If not, does this cause a problem for the notion that our identity exists over time? Contrary to the last theory we looked at, he has no memory of who he was prior to the Weapon X experiment. So if memory is what connects him to his former self, and he has no memory, can it really be said that he's the same? And if there is ever a body that has suffered great damage and regeneration to the point that it is most certainly not the same physical material, but renewed physical stuff, it certainly is his. So he doesn't seem to fit the body theory either. What are we to make of the Wolverine? There's another problem, an ethical problem. Whoever he is now, as X-Man and teacher, is he the same person that at this point in his past murdered people as a rabid Weapon X? If so, ought he to be held accountable for that? Why or why not? What about this guy? Ought he to be held accountable for all of the destruction that he causes anytime he gets angry? Or ought we to go easy on him because it wasn't really him? If it wasn't really him, what do we mean? Are there two persons within one body? Hulk's body is clearly not the same as that of Bruce Banner, or Lou Ferrigno's body is not the same as that of Bill Bixby, if you go by the TV series. So it would seem that body theory is not satisfactory, and yet Banner often seems to have no memory of what happened while he had hulked out. While hulked out, he seems to have no awareness, no consciousness of what's going on. So this might cause a problem for memory theory, and yet there are times as Hulk's speech evolves that he references an awareness of puny Banner within him and an awareness of some of the choices that Banner makes or the ideals which Banner holds that Hulk thinks represent weakness. There is a time in Hulk lore that the monster and human being find a merging of consciousness and they are the same, but there are plenty of times prior to that point in which they seem to be not only different but warring natures or identities. Hulk's identity issues are further complicated by the fact that there were times that he manifested as a gray Hulk that was more intelligent and calmer seeming, and other times that he manifested as the angrier, more monstrous, and impulsive Green Hulk. And actually, when he first manifested, he was more gray and yet less advanced than the green. And there is even an iconic moment in comic lore in which the Gray Hulk and the Green Hulk and Banner are all fighting for control of the seat of identity that is associated with the body. On the other side of that emerges the new Green Hulk that is always hulked out, yet always in control of his mind, because Banner and the Hulk are the same. Body theory doesn't work. Memory theory is messy. There's also the problem of multiple personalities. And this might apply to the real world. In the case of someone that does suffer from multiple personalities, if the memory is different according to the personality that is manifested, are they actually different people in those moments? Or is it a single identity that transcends those manifestations? The 2002 film Minority Report explores the question of pre-crime and a world in which there is a highly efficient empirical methodology. What crimes will happen, when, where, how, and by whom? And so the question is, if this soundproof methodology for determining pre-crime says that you will commit a crime tomorrow, murdering someone, is it fair to try you today? If we wait until tomorrow, you will have killed someone. So it's in the name of utility, the greater good for the greater number, to go ahead and preemptively strike so as to stop you today from committing the crime you would commit tomorrow, and go ahead and try you because you would have committed it had we not stopped you. The question is, are you the same person today that you will allegedly be tomorrow? Is it fair to try you if you have not yet committed the crime, even though this supposedly soundproof method shows that you will? So not only is there the problem of are you the same person you were yesterday, there's the question of are you tomorrow the same person you are today? So the mind-body problem is largely a mind problem. There is the problem of how mind and body interact if there is a mind, but the greater question is there a mind? And if so, what is it? What's it like? What is consciousness? Is the mind the same as the brain? Is there even such a thing as mind? Is the soul the same as the mind? Is there even such a thing as a soul? How shall we go about trying to grasp, to explore and explain the nature of qualia, those basic instances of subjective first-person experiences? Well, it would seem that consciousness must consist of at least three common features. First, conscious experiences must be private. Second, they must be non-localizable. This was Descartes' error. Descartes supposed that the I, the self, must somehow reside within the body. He actually suggested that the pineal gland may serve as the seat of the soul and the place where thoughts are formed. Of course, if this were the case, then if a brain surgeon were to remove someone's pineal gland and they survive the surgery, then they no longer have a self or soul or identity. Now they are just a body. Thus, if conscious experience is non-material, then it would make sense that it is not part of the material. The question remains as to whether it is a phenomena that arises, emerges from the material processes. However, it cannot be localized to a material placement because it seems to be a different kind of thing. Whether in essence or in effect, that's the question. So conscious experiences must be private, they must be non-localizable, and third, they must be intentional. That is, thoughts must be about something. Now, we study our world through science, right? And science is an empirical investigation, experimental, observational, etc. So how do we go about trying to understand consciousness when it is not like the other stuff, or it doesn't seem to be? Well, traditionally, there have been two foundational sources of knowledge. We can study behavior or introspection. So on the one hand, we can observe what conscious beings do when they claim to have certain conscious experiences. On the other hand, the best we can do is ask them about their experiences to describe what's going on in their mind. Now, with developments in certain technologies, we are now able not only to study the behavior, but also to map certain responses through physiological monitoring. So this may involve anything from noting which parts of the brain light up when listening to music, to measuring galvanic skin responses, and so on. Of course, the question remains, is it even possible for the observer, you and I, the other, to access the I, the seat of consciousness of the person we are observing? Are we actually beginning with a faulty methodology? In other words, is it problematic to begin by trying empirically to study this non-empirical thing, if it exists? A plethora of questions drive this inquiry into the mind-body problem. Is consciousness bound up with the body? Or does it exist beyond the body? Can it exist apart from the body? What happens when my body dies? Do I cease to exist? As you know by now, Descartes is renowned for stating that I can be certain that I exist because I am thinking, and I know that I am a thinking thing. Well, I came across a clever meme online. It says, Descartes stops thinking for a split second, dies. Now, it was meant in jest, but it raises a good question. Descartes was certain that he existed because he was thinking, but how do we know that we continue thinking once we die? If mind is inseparable from brain, and when you're brain dead, you're as dead as your body can be, how can we know that we continue to exist? Well, there are theories on this. The ethereal body theory believes that at the moment of death, everything about my personal identity that is encoded in my present physical body is copied over into the new ethereal body. Well, this would include my physical appearance as well as my brain patterns. Reincarnation supposes that one's life is followed by a series of new lives in physical bodies. Now, this raises some interesting questions. We have to throw body theory out the window because we have new bodies, but it would seem that we also have to throw memory theory out the window because people cannot remember their prior lives. So if this is true, how would we know? How could I really know that I was the same I that existed in a different time? Disembodied theory holds that when I die, my mind is released from my physical body and it continues to live in a non-physical realm as a spirit. So this is a spirit realm. This is not far removed from many popular ghost stories in which the deceased continue to live somewhat in some way among us, nor is it far removed from various folklore traditions that believe that the spirits of the deceased have their own realm, and yet they may also be able to visit ours, for example, amidst certain festivals, and they may even be able to somehow bring good fortune to their descendants. So what do you think? Do you exist apart from your body? Are you more than just your body? When your body ages, do you stay the same? Or do you change because your body changes? Are you the same person you were 20 years ago? Why or why not? If you suffer from a mental disability, does this affect your identity? Not how you see yourself, but the core of who you are. Or are you more than just the sum of your disabilities? Whenever the body ceases to be, what then? Does the self, the I, the soul live on or cease? If it's the case that the soul is not reducible to the body, how could the body and soul, or body and mind, possibly communicate with one another or affect one another? Next time we will pick up with defenses for the mind, followed by cases for the body.